Welcome. We invite you to join us on a spiritual journey. You know, no one person or even author has the answer to all the questions. Only God Almighty. But here's one thing I do know. You are loved. There's nothing you can do to make God love you more. And there's nothing you can do to make God love you less. You are loved. Simply that. So I invite you to join us on a journey of drawing near to the heart of God, where that love can transform us. I invite you to connect with us and share your comments on the comment section below this YouTube video, or visit us on our Facebook page and share in the inspirations during the week, and again, share your insights. Or visit our website, mccgd.org. Share with us your prayer requests or your praises, and know that we will pray with you and celebrate with you because we are on this journey together. Now, I pray that God will bless you, that you will have an awesome week in your words, your work, your actions, and your life. God bless. I hope you participated in the prayers. And if you wrote out prayers and praises, place them in that basket in the center of your table. I know once before when I did something different with the offering, people weren't sure, so I'll just say it again. The basket's for your offering. You can pass it to each other, and you can put your financial gifts in the basket as well. So we're at tables, and let me just also say, I'm sorry it's cool in here. We're not sure why, but the air didn't come on like it was supposed to in advance. It's working, and it's warming up slowly but surely. That was not part of the plan. I had not planned to have a chilled service today, so that'll change. But every table has either 4 or 5 chairs at it, and as we have some conversation together today, I invite you to have conversation in pairs or threes, okay? Pairs or threes. So it does not work to have you decide, let's just have the whole table talk, because the truth is you can't hear each other, and there won't be enough time for each person to share, okay? So pairs or threes. Good? Good. All right. So I'm going to invite you to participate with me. All right? Ready? So here's a couple of questions. We're going to put them up on the screen. I'm going to ask you to share just for a minute or so each, just a minute or so, in pairs or threes. How many? Pairs or threes. Are you good with directions, or are you a person who gets lost easily? And then the second question is, when going somewhere new, what resources do you use to get there and why? Please, share. Okay, let me see. How many of you are people that are good with directions? This is honest revealing. How many of you get lost easily? And there's no judgment. We just are, right? That's why we have resources. All right. Well, we're going to watch a little clip here from a national television show. And thanks to Bob for figuring out how to get that clip for us. Thank you. I picked it out, but it was really hard for him to get, so thank Bob for doing that. I watched this clip, and when you watch it too, you might not be sure where it's going. But it does get there, and it does get where I want us to get. So anyways, have a look, have a listen, have a laugh. This is why we're not singing that song today. We spared no expense to have Whoopi Goldberg sing it for us. So it's a good laugh, but there's a lot of good laughter around it, because maybe you're like Rosie O'Donnell and you don't know the story very well of the 3 kings, or maybe you're like Rosie Perez and that's part of your cultural celebration, or maybe you're like Whoopi and you know the story from the songs. You've learned the story primarily from the songs, We 3 Kings, and As with Gladness, all those kinds of songs. Or maybe you're just like Nicole Wallace going, what?
What are you all talking about? You know, churches also call this day Epiphany, and that makes a lot of people go, what? And there's no great song that explains that, like We Three Kings. Oh. So I know that we can get a little lost. So I want to go back to the biblical story because some of us know it from just the songs or from TV movies. So here's a little bit more of the biblical story for you to consider. Okay, it's time for another conversation in your pairs or threes, right? Okay, you can talk to the same people, or if you need to, play a little musical chairs and move seats, you can do that as well. I'm going to ask you, what does the story tell you about the wise men or the magi? Both names. Magi is the traditional name used, or the wise men. Sometimes we talked about the wise ones, and I know that there's even a video out there about the wise guys, but whatever you want to call them. What does the story tell you about the wise ones, the wise men? Would you please share in your pairs or threes? Okay, welcome back. Let me take a few shares of things that you know about the wise ones. So what are a few things that you know from the story? What are some things you know? Who can tell me something? Yes?
There weren't necessarily three.
There weren't necessarily three. That's shocking. That's shocking. Do you mean the Bible doesn't give us a number?
Correct.
That is correct. Yeah, there's no number. But the songs have made it famous that there's three. There could have been a whole bunch more. We have no idea. It simply says the wise ones. We've made it the Feast of the Three Kings, and we sing songs about three, but we don't know there was three. Yes? They were what? Good with stars. Absolutely. Some think they were astrologers. So they followed a star. Good. And they were good at following the stars, reading the stars. Yes? They didn't all come from the same country. Do we know that? What do we know? Maybe. I don't know. It simply says they came from the east. Well, let's see. Well, we'll check that out. They came from afar, from the east. We don't know. What were their names?
We don't know.
I thought their names were Melchior, Caspar, and Balthazar. Oh, maybe it's interesting question. What else do we know about them? Yes? They trust their dreams. And they were willing to do something different. Anything else?
They were good with directions.
Good with directions.
We could assume they were scholars because they knew that the Jews were going to be looking for a savior. So they probably had scholarly religious works from other cultures.
Good. So they were probably scholars that they seemed to know about the Jews were looking for a Messiah, and they knew enough to ask for some more details. Good. Yeah. In the little video we saw, too, we saw them going to a house. They didn't seem to go to a manger. Did that surprise you in that little video, that they went to a house? Yeah. And it seemed to surprise Rosie O'Donnell that they were late, That's like... But then Whoopi said they were traveling. They had a long ways to go. They didn't get there the night the baby was born. That's what we understand, is that they came a little later. So we've moved the manger scene a little bit back here in our scenario. But it had the star attached to it, so I had to leave it so that the star was still shining. Otherwise, they'd be traveling in the dark without their guideposts. Anything else? Yes, back here, and then I'll... Yes?
Yes. Well, if the child was around 2 years old, I would think they would have had time to get a house and get out of that anyway.
So thinking that we don't know how old the child was, but we're thinking about 2 years. We'll say that in a minute. You may hear that in a moment. But they did have a chance then to have moved out of the barn into something a little bit better. Yay. Yeah, that was a temporary dwelling, not a permanent residence. Okay.
Well, that's what I was thinking. The baby was sitting up, and I know a baby doesn't sit up until they're about 6 months old.
That was cool. So even from the cartoon, you have a sense that the child was a little bit older. That's right. Let's hear the actual Bible story, and I want you to listen for some of the details in the Bible story. So we have the separation of the things that we know from the song versus the actual story. So then you can listen. You won't hear their names. We won't hear how many there were. But let's listen for what we do hear.
After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out that from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On the coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and they worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route.
So, it may seem surprising to be sharing in small group discussion, pairs and threes, and talking about this and sharing what you knew about the wise men before we even read the story to you. But that's exactly what was happening with the women of the View, is they were sharing what they did know by tradition, what they did remember, and asking their questions. And the result is, even in very funny form, that Whoopi Goldberg was sharing the gospel story, right? And I think that Rosie O'Donnell probably knew more of it than she was letting on, and using her comic self of using denial as a comedy tool. But it was very interesting that in the midst of the View, they got to share a story from the Bible in a very ordinary way. And all kinds of people heard. There's all kinds of tools and resources you can use and I can use to help us find our way, to help others find their way in the world. And sharing what you do know, you don't have to worry about what you don't know. Amen? But sharing what you do know might help someone find some direction. Do you remember these? How many of you grew up using these? Okay, for the young guys that are here, this was called a map. Called a map, and it had all the roads that were in existence at the time that the map was published, right? If you're going to take a trip, you would get out these big maps, and you would start on one page, and you might go over to another page and find your way to the state that you were going. And then you might have to get a city map, because this would be a country or state map, and then you might have to get a city map to actually find your way, or sometimes there was inserts that gave you more detail on the city, right? And you'd find your way. Well, we were going on a trip last summer and grabbed the road atlas, isn't that what they called it, to look, and got ready, and we're already driving. I opened it up because we're going into the next state. I knew how to get out of the state, get the next state, open it up, and the page for that state had been ripped out. Now, people often did that because these things were too cumbersome to carry around, right? So if you knew you just needed Oklahoma, you might tear Oklahoma out and use it. But often we didn't put it back in, and the next person would be lost without it. Goodness, it wasn't much good to us. A number of years ago, while pastoring this church, a member of the church gifted me with a Garmin. Do you remember those? With a Garmin. Yeah, I had been traveling to some different hospitals in our city, and we have so many different hospitals. And since we're a non-geographical parish, which means our members come from everywhere, you all go to every hospital in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. So sometimes as a pastor, you're trying to find your way not just to the major hospitals, but all those other smaller hospitals and surgical centers can be a nightmare. Or finding your way to everyone's home. So after I had gotten lost and taken some time, a congregant decided to gift me with a Garmin, particularly because I'd called their spouse for directions because I knew they had one. So they thought it was a good idea that I have my own. So I had that Garmin in my car, and it helped me find my way around to a lot of things. But if you remember those first generation navigational systems, and the young guys may not know this, but they needed updates. Isn't that true? You were supposed to take that thing out of your car, hook it up to your computer, and then you would have to purchase and download an update. That was a lot of steps. And money. So many of us did not. Is that true? We did not update our Garmins. We would just keep driving. So what the result was that it would not have all of the current data. I did not update mine as I ought to, and I can remember driving to some places with directions that someone had given me, and the Garmin would tell me I was in an open field, right? Our home, where Shelley and I live, is on a private road. Those are not listed on the early generation navigational system, so it always would show me driving into a field. And it would say, I was not there, you turn, you know. And I would already be home in my driveway. When they built the Louisville Lake Bridge, this was one of my favorite things, the Garmin would show me driving over water. And it would keep saying, caution, caution. You've heard of walking on water. Well, your pastor can drive on water according to that, that thing. Well, now our navigational systems in cars automatically update. Those of you that have smartphones, you have navigational systems on your phones, and you don't even have to look at it while you're driving because it talks to you. We have many more tools, and we don't have to plug them in to update all the time because they sync automatically and they're updating automatically, right? Right? Yeah. The new roads that are being built get added. True? And roads that are closed seem to get changed in the more modern systems, and the updates are happening automatically. Now, I have found, though, sometimes that if I follow the directions on my navigational system on my car, that sometimes it'll take me a little bit longer. You know, it has the quick and the shortest route. But then sometimes we know some other little shortcuts and things like that that will work. You have to tell those machines whether or not you want to go on a toll road or not, right? You have to give it some information, and it gives you some information. I have found that sometimes it's helpful for me to have directions from someone as well as my GPS. I know what landmarks to be watching for, because sometimes the GPS will tell me to turn, and I'm seeing like 3 different roads, and I have done this before. I'm turning, it goes turn, you know, it's like in point 1, you know, or point 2, point 1, and you turn, and the next thing you know is you're in a shopping mall, because it meant the road next. So sometimes having signs along the way that someone else could tell you is helpful. Helpful to have both. And let me ask you, what does GPS stand for anyways? Say it really loud, Thomas. So some people are saying global, some people are saying geographical. I'm not sure. Positioning system. It's supposed to tell you where you are. Do you know where you are? I want to say, I'm here. But we use them to help us get to another place, right? Some have also said that GPS might stand for God's provision system. How do you like that one? There is a Saturday Night Live skit. It's a little edgy, yeah, by the 3 Wise Guys. You should watch for it with Robert De Niro, Sylvester Stallone, and I don't remember the third one. Went out of my mind. I can see his face. Oh, well. And they say that the GPS stands for Going Places by Star. You like that? Going Places by Star. So the wise men did not have the sophisticated navigation systems or smartphones that we have. They were going places by star. They did follow a GPS, and they asked locals for directions. They stopped. They were willing to stop. Hello. They stopped in Jerusalem and said, "Where is the child?" We've heard, and we understand that you know the local, you know the prophecies better, you know the local situation better. Sometimes that happens when we're following our system. Sometimes it's helpful to stop and ask a local. True or true? Okay. Let's speak metaphorically. What spiritual navigation system are you using? What tool, what method are you using to find your way spiritually? And when was the last time you updated your spiritual map? In other words, are you stuck on a familiar, favorite, even trusted road? In other words, I want you to think about how you approach God, how you approach faith, weekly, daily. Do you use the same pathway to the divine every single time? And I want to ask you if perhaps God is inviting you to update your map and consider a new pathway to encountering the divine. Is God inviting you to a spiritual map update? There's absolutely nothing wrong with a well-worn path. Amen? Absolutely nothing wrong with that, unless the Spirit is directing you to take another road. What did we read in the story? And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. What might have happened if the Magi had gone back through Jerusalem, back the way they had come, and ran into Herod again? Oops. What might have happened? Oh my goodness. Sometimes the Spirit is warning us. Sometimes the Spirit is nudging us. Sometimes the Spirit is encouraging us to do something new, to take a different path. Because some of us have been doing the same thing for a long, long time. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with a well-worn path. However, we also know Albert Einstein's famous saying that the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And some of us have been doing that spiritually. Amen? Maybe you also are familiar with the poem by Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler, long as I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth, then took the other as just as fair and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that passing there had worn them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Have we been missing a road that God is calling us to take because we want to travel the well-worn path? What would it mean to you spiritually? What would it mean to us together spiritually to take another route? Could it mean all the difference? Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, And that has made all the difference. So I'm going to invite you again to talk in your small groups and answer that question best you can. Your initial gut reactions. What would it mean spiritually for you or for us to take another route? Think about it in terms of worship, in terms of prayer, in terms of mission, in terms of your daily living in relationship with the divine. What would it mean to do those things differently, to take another route? What might that look like? And maybe this is the easier question for some of you. What fears do you have about taking the road less traveled? Let's take some time together. Well, my friends, there's lots to think about there, isn't there? Sometimes to find your words and to think about what is scary about it. There's lots of reasons to fear or be concerned about getting lost, isn't there? Or getting lost going somewhere new or doing something new. The Seinfeld quote here, sometimes the road less traveled is less traveled for a reason. And that might be what some of you are feeling or thinking. But there's another perspective as well. Alexander Graham Bell said, when one door closes, another opens, but we often look so long and so regretfully at the closed door that we do not see the one which has opened for us. The sermon is always hard. Figuring it out is so hard, isn't it? It's the challenge. M. Scott Peck, who wrote the book A Road Less Traveled, said, the truth is that our finest moments are most likely to occur when we are feeling deeply uncomfortable, unhappy, or unfulfilled. Does that make you happy? I don't think so. For it's only in such moments, propelled by our discomfort, that we are likely to step out of our ruts and start searching for different ways or truer answers. Let me go back to an opening piece. I talked about change happening earlier in the service. I talked about change happening at Shelley's in my house at our schedule yesterday and about someone being stuck in our driveway. This is the second time inside of a couple of weeks that a vehicle has gotten lost, decided to come up our driveway, which is a private driveway. One was a cement truck and one being this tow truck who drove off and got stuck in the ditch and have tore up the road. That caused us to be blocked in, but it's that discomfort that causes us then to have some conversation about putting more gravel on our road. We were able to get by. Do you hear what I'm saying? The discomfort of some change can promote us to taking an action, which will lead to the happiness. We have a discomfort and an unhappiness in the moment of the change, but it may propel us forward into something better that we have not yet seen. God is up to something, church. I believe that. And God is up to something with us, and specifically here at MCCGD, but in the church in America. Challenges and threats exist all around to our spiritual lives. There's a cultural competition for our worship time and our commitments. The church is one of the few things left in the culture that's at a specific time and date. Almost everything else you can access at any time. True? Church worship has changed and evolved over the centuries, contrary to some of our thinking that it's always been this way. It's not. Just think about the use of the organ itself in church. Fewer churches have big organs anymore. And some of us grieved that and loved the organ music and loved big choirs. But that is not the norm in the majority of churches in America today. Worship has changed over the centuries. The style of worship, the sound of worship, the look of worship, and even the smell of worship. Not everybody uses incense anymore. I believe that God is calling us to take a road less traveled together and individually. That God is calling us to respond to the Herods of our day who are a threat to our spiritual worship and our lives, who would steal our joy and our commitment. And so I believe God is directing us to take another route. It's time for a map update, people. The old roads are in need of repair, and new roads are before us and have been built. So I want you to think about how this might renew your own curiosity about God, like a relationship renewal or a relationship makeover. Even people who've been in relationship for a long, long time sometimes need something that's different, that disturbs things a little bit to create a relationship renewal. Perhaps we need that with the divine. Think about how this could apply to our doing outreach and inviting our friends and family to come to church or to reconsider a relationship with God. Doug Pollock, in his book God Space, says this: "This doesn't necessarily mean that we have to throw away our old maps, although it could. It does mean that we need to start with an attitude of humility. Times change, cultures shift. If we aren't willing to pull over and ask directions from those we're trying to reach, we'll miss the hearts of the very people God wants us to connect with. And I would add, we'll miss those people God needs us to connect with for our own spiritual growth, as well as missing the people we're to reach out to and assist." He goes on and says, "Have you ever moved to a new city and found yourself getting lost? A lot." Boy, I can insert here and say I sure remember coming to Dallas and my shock and dismay at discovering that Cedar Springs intersects itself. That if you wanted to stay on Cedar Springs, you had to make a left-hand turn, because if you went gaily forward, you'd be on the wrong street. So Doug Pollock says, "Did it ever occur to you that while you were getting lost, you were actually becoming familiar with the city in ways that would help you find your way in the future? Didn't Jesus encourage us to be a seeking, asking, and knocking kind of people? Are you starting to see how this metaphor might continue to help us start and continue spiritual conversations with others? Every time you go somewhere new the first time, it always seems to take longer, doesn't it? And as we travel this unfamiliar road, we do become more familiar with it, and it seems to take less time. As we try new paths, we're better able to get around the city and move around the spiritual landscape. The Catholic religious order of Jesuit priests, some of you have heard of them, have applied the travel of the Magi to their spiritual lives and to those they give counsel, called spiritual direction. They encourage people to go by one route and to return by another, to look and see the varied options and opportunities that God places before them, and to simply notice different things along the route. Perhaps in 2015, God is speaking to you to break routine and take another road. Perhaps God is inviting you to avoid the deadly path of apathy, or senses dulled by familiarity, and open yourself to a new path of discovery for yourself with God, for yourself in talking about your faith with other people, for yourself in considering spiritual matters, and yes, even for our worship together. So I'm going to ask, are you willing in 2015 to see where the Spirit is leading you? Are you willing to travel the road less traveled with the Spirit? I suggest that we go home to God, as it says, always come home to God, and we sing those songs, and come home to mission by another route. So let's together update our maps and see where God is leading. Stay tuned.